How can we discover and deal with our own prejudices when sharing God's love with someone of a different background or ethnicity? How can we become aware of the stumbling stones that we put in the way of faith sharing with people from different cultures? Welcome to World Methodist Evangelism's Real Faith, Real World podcast, where we connect the faith within us with the world around us. At World Evangelism, we desire for Christ followers within the global Wesleyan family to become agents of transformation by sharing the gospel through the power of the Holy Spirit. We do so through training, gathering, and resourcing to fulfill our mission to equip and encourage Christ followers around the world to share their faith in the context of today's realities. My name is Rob Haynes, Director of Education and Leadership at World Evangelism. Thank you for listening. This podcast is made possible through the generosity of Christ Church Global in Memphis, Tennessee, and we thank them for their support. If you're finding us for the first time, can I ask you to subscribe on your favorite podcast app? You can also find it at worldmethodist.org/podcast. There you'll also find a way that you can leave your questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes. You can also connect with us on social media. You'll find all those links in today's show notes. Globally, there are over 270 million refugees and international migrants. This is the largest movement of people in human history. The issue of migration has been a difficult one for governments, both national and local, and the issues of COVID-19 have only complicated these matters further. However, all of these present a unique opportunity for the church and for faith sharing. This episode is a two-part presentation on these issues of diaspora people, migrant communities, and the signs and wonders that God is doing among them. We're talking with the Reverend Dr. Zaki El Zaki, who is a pastor in Roselle, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. In this first episode, Zaki talks about diaspora communities. Diaspora is a word in New Testament Greek that means those who are scattered. Think of the Israelite people being scattered into foreign lands. Today, we are seeing the largest scattering of people ever. And keeping that in mind, I think you'll be encouraged and inspired by his ministry among the diaspora communities in Chicagoland. Zaki, welcome to the Real Faith, Real World podcast. Help our listeners get to know you a little bit.
Well, I was born and raised in the country of Sudan, the son and the grandson of Egyptian missionaries that were sent from Egypt, from the Egyptian church, to build and serve churches in Sudan. Sometime in the mid 80s, as millions of refugees were crossing over from Ethiopia to Sudan, I felt a call to work among refugees. So I ended up working for like 8 years or so with different refugee agencies and groups, including the United Nations. And I ended up in Cyprus, serving in the regional capacity, serving refugee communities in many parts of the region of the Middle East. We had ministry and work in places such as Lebanon, Iraq, Iran, Egypt, of course, Sudan, and many other countries in that region. And it was during that time that I felt the Lord was calling me to ministry. And so to make a long story short, a door was open for me to come to the United States to study theology. And I came in 1989, studied theology in Chicago. And in 1993, started serving. At that time, I was doing my DMin, my Doctor of Ministry. started serving at a local United Methodist Church in Tinley Park in northern Illinois. And then 1997, I was called to start serving as a local pastor. And a few years later, I was ordained. And that kind of started my journey, with the United Methodist or in the United Methodist Church in northern Illinois here. And currently, I serve as a local pastor. I currently serve as I'm an elder, an ordained elder. I currently serve Roselle United Methodist Church. Roselle is one of the northwestern suburbs of Chicago. I started at Roselle less than 2 years ago, so I give a lot of credit to those who have served there before me, but we are certainly continuing the emphasis on reaching out to our community, and we're very engaged missionally, locally and globally as well.
You certainly are, and you bring up an important point, and that's particularly work among refugee and immigrant communities. You, as someone who born and raised in another country and coming to the United States, hold a unique position in that. And it's interesting to me that no matter where I go across the church around the world, this remains an important topic, no matter what the country that I find myself in. So help us understand some of the work that you're doing there, because it's certainly an important work for the church. It's a discussion in politics and other areas. How are you ministering to people from refugee and immigrant communities?
Thank you I think this is a very important point to kind of reflect on and to talk about.
Yeah.
One of the ways in which I serve our connection, our United Methodist Church, is by serving as chairperson of the Middle East United Methodist Caucus. The caucus was organized in October 2015 and was recognized by the 2016 General Conference as one of the ethnic caucuses of the United Methodist Church. And as one of the founders and as the current president of this caucus, we are active in some 20 plus cities in North America, in Europe, in Africa, and in Asia. And basically, we are very influenced by some key biblical concepts or biblical passages. We talk a lot about the concept of the diaspora, those who, for one reason or another, find themselves scattered all over the world. And there's more than 270 million refugees, internally displaced people, and immigrants in our world today. A large number of diaspora people, so to speak. So we often reflect on passages such as Acts 8:4 that says, now those who were scattered went about preaching the word. Now, the word scattered used here is the word diaspora. We know why those in Acts 8 were scattered. They were scattered because of the persecution that faced the first church or the early church. Many are scattered today because of wars and famines and internal conflicts and persecution, but it is the same. It is the same dynamic, and I always feel that it is unfortunate that Acts 8:4 translates as such. It says those who were scattered went about preaching the word. But the Greek word that is translated preaching is actually evangelizing. It's the word evangelizomino. They were scattered because of persecution. They went about evangelizing, sharing the good news, and not just went about. Some translations put even a stronger emphasis and says went everywhere. So we want to encourage the believers among the Middle Eastern and North African diaspora to catch this vision of seizing the opportunity of being scattered everywhere to evangelize, to preach the gospel, to preach the gospel. Now, we are also very influenced by other passages such as Isaiah 62:10. If you'd allow me to read that passage to you, and I'll read it from the ESV. It says, go through the gates, prepare the way for the people, build up the highway, clear it of stones, lift up a banner or a signal over the peoples. We strongly believe that this is a unique missional time, or a time of visitation for what we would call difficult to reach people groups. Faithful evangelists and missionaries have labored for a century and a half, and even longer, right, to reach out. Groups like our sisters and brothers who are Muslims, or Yazidis, or different groups in that region of the Middle East and North Africa.
Right.
But they did not see much in terms of fruit. Just a few decades ago, you could talk about a handful of Christians who came to the Lord from a Muslim background.
Right.
But today they're coming in the hundreds of thousands.
Wow.
And the work is initiated primarily based on what I know and what I see and what I hear. The work is initiated primarily by the Lord Himself. Wow, yes. Who appears to many, who reveals Himself in dreams and in visions, to many, who calls people by name, who sees them in their struggle as they are crossing borders and taking incredible risks just to survive, and he out of compassion, because He is the same, yesterday, today, and forever. Yes. The same compassion that we read about in the Gospels is evident very much in the work of the risen Christ among us today. So out of compassion, the Lord continues to appear to people in dreams and in visions, people of different faith traditions, people who have only heard about Him and don't know much at all about Him. But that initial, that initial step that the Lord Himself initiates invites us to rise up and understand that this is a very unique and perhaps unprecedented missional moment, and that there is a role for us in terms of following up, in terms of just as it was with Saul of Tarsus. The risen Christ appeared to him But then there was a role for an Ananias. And Ananias had to believe. Ananias had to overcome his own personal fear.
Right.
Ananias had to be obedient, and Ananias was used to take Saul of Tarsus to the next step. Began the process of discipleship. Began the relational process of introducing him to other believers, and so on and so forth. So the Lord is leading the way.
Yes.
And I magnify and glorify His name. But there is a role for the believers among the diaspora communities to take the next step. We have to remember that Ananias was a diaspora person. He was a Jew, but because of persecution, was in exile, or was living as a refugee, or whatever term you want to use, in Damascus.
Right. That's true.
So God used that diaspora believer to guide Paul and to begin to equip him and discipleship, to begin to disciple him.
What an
So the going through the gates, I think is very very significant, and in the Hebrew is the word biro, crossing over, or coming over, come over. And then that reminds me of Acts 16:9, where we read that verse, "Come over to Macedonia and help us."
Right.
So I think there is a need for us to kind of rise up, to this unprecedented opportunity and come over, or cross over, or go through the gates. And when I hear the word gates, what comes to my heart is the promise that Jesus made, that the gates of hell will not prevail over the church. So the going through the gates might be very, very, very challenging, especially when we are going through to reach, difficult to reach groups of people. And the difficulty here has to do with a long history, a long history of, maybe misunderstanding, a long history of conflict. But the going through the gates is very important to reach, or to evangelize, even difficult to reach groups of people. And then I don't want to, say too much, but we kind of believe that preparing the way for the people, or building up the highway, is very, very important. To reach unreached or difficult to reach groups, there needs to be a lot of preparation. There needs to be, a scholarly, work that needs to be done. Just the right kind of apologetics. There's a lot of work in terms of preparation, training, equipping. And I love this part of the verse that says, "Clear it of stones." And for me, the stones are those obstacles, the stumbling stones. So you talk to a Muslim, for example, anywhere in the world, and there are 4 or 5 stumbling stones or obstacles that she or he would bring up.
Yeah, tell us more about those.
Well, if you speak to a Muslim anywhere in the world, an attempt to, genuinely and sincerely and in a way that is led by the Spirit, to share with this person the good news of Jesus Christ. This person will always bring, 3 or 4 or 5, what I call stones or obstacles, things that kind of have historically stood in the way and made it very, very difficult for Muslims to kind of see Jesus for who Jesus is, except for the fact that Jesus now is revealing himself with tremendous love and tremendous compassion to many Muslims, and we kind of follow, in the way. So Muslim would always, bring up the challenge of, do you worship 3 gods?
Right.
Right. How is it that you worship 3 gods? No, we don't worship 3 gods. We worship one God. And then we begin to kind of unpack, the Trinity in a way that a Muslim, from a cultural and also a religious point of view, can understand. We know there are ways to use concepts in the Quran itself to unpack, the Trinity, or to make the Trinity, understandable, or at least a concept that is, reasonable to talk about. Sure. From a Muslim point of view. Right. Another great obstacle is, is what the Quran talks about in terms of, the false concept of the Trinity in that's sometimes alluded to in the Quran, where Mary is part of the Trinity. And we know that of course, has roots in some of the, the heresies that prevailed in that part of the world. Right. And elsewhere, during the formative, historic stage where Islam was being formed, in terms of ideas and concepts and so on and so forth. The resurrection, the crucifixion, the cross is a big stumbling block. How can you explain the cross to a Muslim, and so on and so forth? So just as we are invited to go through the gates or to cross over and enter, gated communities are difficult communities to go through.
That's true.
Or at least have to make an effort to go through. But we will, but those gates will not prevail against the church, because this is a time of visitation.
Right.
But just as it's important to kind of mobilize people and to say to them, evangelize, live your life missionally. Yes, you are a diaspora person. Yes, you are a refugee. Yes, you are an immigrant, but you are not here by accident. Yes. And remember Acts 8:4, those who were scattered everywhere went about, not wasting their time, or not squandering the time, or not, living in desperation or in self-pity, or caught up in, identity politics, but they went about, focusing on evangelizing the world around them, and they felt that was, that was a priority for them to do it, even in the diaspora. But just as it's important to prepare the way in terms of resources and training and all of that, we have to clear the stones, those obstacles. Sure. And I think the biggest, if you would allow me to say this, the biggest stone that needs to be cleared is the prejudices that exist. I'm a person of Egyptian descent. I grew up in, was born and raised in Sudan. And, I had to, many years ago, because of my commitment to Christ and to the kingdom, I had to deal with my own prejudices, in terms of relating to Muslims. In my own personal experience, there were many occasions in which, I felt severely, persecuted and disadvantaged by the Muslim majority.
Wow.
Or by at least the radical elements within the Muslim majority.
Right.
My grandfather and his family. My grandfather was a pastor, and he was the head of the evangelical church in Sudan. And in 1964, an angry, mob in Sudan, an angry Muslim mob in Sudan, encircled, the place where he lived, which was the headquarters of the evangelical church,
Right.
In Sudan. And they with tremendous anger, they burned the place down to the ground, an entire block that included the residence where my grandfather and my aunts and uncles and so on lived, but also the place included a library, Christian library, a seminary. The entire place was burned down to the ground, and the only reason that my grandparents and my aunts and uncles survived, because there was an attempt to kill them. The only reason they survived was the fact that there were 3 American missionary families that lived in the same compound. And the American embassy in Khartoum immediately dispatched the Marines. And the Marines literally drove through the flames.
Oh my!
Of that burning complex, that burning compound or block. They literally drove through the flames, and they had orders to evict only American citizens. But the American missionaries insisted that they're going nowhere unless everyone else is evicted.
Wow.
Everyone else is, not evicted, evacuated,
Right.
or rescued. That's how my grandparents and my aunts and uncle were rescued. So, I could have lived the rest of my life with at least some, internal kind of, I don't want to say hatred, but perhaps hatred. Certainly, at least a sense of prejudice,
right?
Prejudice against these people who wanted to kill my family. And that's just one incident. I can share with you so many other incidents. And but one of the first stones in my personal life, obstacles that had to be cleared, was any sense of dislike, prejudice, hate, anger against. All of that needs to go, so that someone like me or anyone else can actually, be in a position to be used by God to preach, the gospel of grace, the gospel of love, the gospel of forgiveness. I couldn't have been used by God, and unless that stone in my own life was kind of cleared. So we see a lot of Muslims and people from other faith traditions, Yazidis, but because I'm specifically talking about the region of the Middle East and North Africa, so I talk about Islam. I see a lot of people from Muslim backgrounds coming to Christ and embracing Christ very sincerely. But then how can we make a place for them in our churches?
Right. Such an important
They
question.
come from yes, they come from a different tradition. We can't just kind of ignore their presence or assume that they will kind of just assimilate completely to the point that they can just fit in. And I think that sometimes happens, but I believe that we also have a responsibility to intentionally welcome them into Christian communities and understand where they're coming from, and kind of celebrate what they bring in terms of their own journey.
Because we have the largest scattering of people, the largest diaspora movement right now in history, we have a unique opportunity to welcome in people from other ethnicities and cultures like never before. We don't have to go far away to do so, but we can reach out right in our own communities, wherever we may live, to welcome people into Christian community. What an important point that Zaki brings up, and an amazing example that he is doing there in Chicago. On the next episode, we're going to hear from Zaki about an encounter with someone who was not a Christian, but had encountered the signs and wonders of God. Zaki showed up and paid attention to what the Holy Spirit was doing in this person's life, and you are going to love the story, so make sure that you catch the next episode as well. Our thanks again to Christ Church Global for sponsoring this episode. Would you please be sure to rate and subscribe? We'd also love to hear from you about your suggestions, comments, or questions at podcast@worldmethodist.org. I'm Rob Haynes, and you can catch me on social media at Dr. Rob Haynes. It's DrRobHaynes. Thank you for listening to this episode of WME's Real Faith, Real World podcast.